Hello everybody, we're back for another video on AP World History Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, and our focus this time is going to be on Africa between the years mostly 1200 and 1450, and we'll be looking at how these states got developed and their governing system and a few other factors. Some of these things that we talk about, they will be popping up later on in the book, but this will give you a little exposure to them and help you better understand them. Now, one of our goals by the end of this block of instruction is that you'll be able to take these vocabulary words, which are from your textbook, and these videos are no substitute for reading the text on your own. You should do this in combination with this video, read the book. And you want to take some of these terms and you want to plot them. Inland Africa, and I'll explain that in a second, then East Africa and West Africa. So let's go back to the map. So when we're talking inland Africa, we're talking about this area that's away from the coast and in the interior of Africa. And this is equatorial area. It's south of the Sahara Desert. Let's look at some of the major areas that we're going to look at. Right here you have the Hausa Kingdom. And this is going to later on change and work into one of the great kingdoms of human history, the Mali Kingdom, that we'll be studying a lot more when we study trade routes, which is coming up next unit. So the Hausa Kingdom is here. Ethiopia we talked about and how it developed kind of separately. And we're talking here this area, Great Zimbabwe, and this is along the coast of East Africa. So a couple of things that you have going on here. Let's talk about how these regions form. Right, these benefit greatly from Indian Ocean trade, from trade routes coming from the Indian Ocean and landing on the ports of Africa. This area here, the Hausa Kingdom, and much more so the Mali Kingdom, the houses start developing and they benefit greatly from this trade route here, which is called the Trans-Saharan trade route. It goes from North Africa down the coast of Africa. There were other routes that went south, but primarily the ocean was much easier than going across the desert. A couple of symbols real fast. We're going to be talking, we've mentioned this man before. Whenever you see this guy, it's Ibn Battuta, and this is where he was traveling in the region. So if you go back to past videos that have this type of a map, that means Ibn Battuta traveled there and he was studying everywhere Islam is. He was studying Dar al-Islam. We'll be learning about this much more later on in Unit 2. Mansa Musa, who is a strong leader and brings this part of Africa probably to its height with the capital at Timbuktu. And these represent gold because that's how much gold he brought with him when he made his journey to Mecca, in the Holy Land for Islamic faith. Okay, so a couple of things we want to talk about also. These have these boats, and at the end of this era, these are the Portuguese, and they are looking for a route to get to the east, rather than having it go all through the Silk Road and have to travel all that way and pay taxes to people who are not Christians. These are European Christians, and this area is controlled greatly by Dar al-Islam. There was a crusade that was fought in this region of the world, left a lot of hard feelings. It was very expensive for goods to get from the east all the way to Europe, and they started looking for ways to get to the east. And the Portuguese, which we'll learn in Unit 4, are setting up trade posts all over the coast of Africa and then as far away as South Asia and India. They also are introducing, in the 16th century, they start introducing chattel slavery from Africa to the Americas. So let's just go to some of the underguiding developments real fast. By 1000 Christian era, most sub-Saharan areas had adopted agriculture, but they did not form any centralized government. So sub-Saharan means this. Here's the Sahara Desert. It's this major block from that basically disconnects Afro-Eurasia from in the southern parts of Africa. The coast had some exposure to it, but inland Africa and south of the Sahara was not the same. It was just hard to get here through the jungle. In Africa, governance is basically because of kinwork, midworks, and it's decentralized. It's led by a chief and basically would work with other tribes in the area to make a confederation. They were with each other. They had the same ideas, similar language, customs, etc., but they were independent of each other. In time, the Hausa Kingdom starts to emerge, and it's decentralized, but they gather a lot of these tribes into one big confederation. And they have elements of centralization, but mostly it's decentralized. It's still kin-based network. It's not necessarily like an empire or anything like that. The Hausa Kingdom benefits from the trade routes from the Sahara and the Indian Ocean. So trade would come from the Indian Ocean and make their way across the Sahara, or they travel from the Silk Roads, and they would go ahead and get to there. The Hausa Kingdom is a really good example of how governance is going to work in Africa. It starts with kin-based, and then you have enough of these tribes getting together to make something of a political entity that is still decentralized, but they're forming pretty much along financial exposure and access to trade routes. All right, so that's going to be a pattern that repeats itself. And just as Africa is starting to develop some forms of strength in their economy, their learning is tremendous, their culture is rich, you have the Portuguese come in, and you're going to start having massive deportation, or excuse me, removal of people because of slavery going into the Americas. And this really does have an impact on the development of Africa. So one of the things that does happen in African society, women held a much higher role than in many places like in China and and other parts of Eurasia. Women do have a very high place. They're called the griots, and they are primarily, you either have the griot or the griots. Griot are male, griots though are predominant, and these are the storytellers and historians of the tribe. They also are believed to have supernatural powers to contact the dead or to destroy property, to cause prosperity, something along those lines. And they are very tied to the constructs of animism, which is nature worship and worship of the dead. And this is going to be carried from Africa in a lot of its forms, and when it's brought to the New World, as we discussed, it's going to merge with certain elements of Roman Catholicism and form voodoo. So anytime you have people that live in a more decentralized area, you tend to typically have more liberation for women. The societal structures came about as these kingdoms became more centralized. We're going to be going into a lot more detail about Africa when we talk about the trade routes, the Indian Ocean trade route and the Trans-Saharan trade route and the Silk Roads. So we have lots more to come, but I wanted to give you a basic idea that these are basically non-centralized governments that developed where the trade routes made a natural place for them to come. And they became very rich. And we'll be looking also very much at the impact that the Columbian Exchange, which is later on during maritime expansion of Europe into the Americas, how it affected Africa greatly. And then we're going to talk a lot about Africa during imperialism. Africa has really had a lot of suffering caused upon by foreign powers in its history, and it does cause some of the problems that they have today. Africa is still developing, and its history has there are a lot of reasons for why Africa has been delayed in its development and still struggles today that we'll be investigating through the course. As for now, that's what we need to talk about, and you should, after reading these notes and listening to this video and looking at the map, be able to fill in all of these terms and maybe a few more like Ibn Battuta or something like that. Have a great day.